Greetings, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever in the world you may be joining us from today. Thank you for taking time out of your busy schedules to join us for the first in this webinar series, Voices from the Afforestation Frontlines. On behalf of the co-organizers, I would like to thank you. These include Friends of the Saskatoon Afforestation Areas, Juventud Unida en Acción, and my own organization, Animal People. We would like to thank the UN Environment Program for approving this webinar series and for promoting it through its channels and bringing people on board to participate. So to begin, I am going to play a video with a land acknowledgement and introduction.
Good day to everyone joining us from around the world. We are so grateful you could be here for the webinar series, Voices from the Afforestation Frontlines, Advancing Sustainable Solutions for a Resilient Planet. My name is Julia Adamson from the environmental charity Friends of the Saskatoon Afforestation Areas, an organization accredited under the United Nations Environment Program. It is my honor to welcome you on behalf of our team and collaborators. We extend deep thanks to our partners and colleagues. Wolf Gordon-Clifton, Executive Director of Animal People, bringing expertise in animal welfare, conservation, sustainable development, and interfaith advocacy. Delia Marca, Master of Science, Human Rights and Protection Systems, CEO and founder of Juventud Unida en Acción, Advancing Equity, Justice and Peace through Youth Leadership. This webinar series was made possible by the inspiration from Fraser Yahya's Sagai, Public Advocacy and Volunteerism Director for Friends of the Saskatoon Afforestation Areas, co-facilitator of the UNEP Women Major Group, and Women 7 Advisor for the G7 Summit. We also acknowledge the invaluable input of our many global partners taking part in the 3 webinar themes: biodiversity and ecosystem resilience, sustainable human-animal interactions, community engagement in conservation. The Global Traditional Land Acknowledgement. As we gather virtually from many places across the world, we acknowledge the lands, waters, and skies that sustain us. Being connected to the land and the gifts it provides is a grounding part of our relationships with Mother Earth. In gratitude, we honor the sacred waters, grasslands, forests, biodiversity, and skies that inspire our shared journey. In the spirit of reconciliation, right relations are enhanced by learning from Indigenous worldviews, including Wakatoan, a Cree word from the Nahiawak that reminds us of the kinship and interconnectedness of all people, communities, and natural systems. Guided by this teaching, we come together to walk with respect, reciprocity, and responsibility toward the earth and one another. This webinar series takes place in the lead-up to the United Nations Environmental Assembly, UNEA 7, under the theme, Advancing Sustainable Solutions for a Resilient Planet. Together, we will explore the interlinked challenges of climate change, biodiversity loss, and human-nature relationships, while showcasing grassroots action, conservation strategies, and community-driven approaches that inform global policy. By joining us, you will gain insights into local and global conservation efforts, hear strategies that foster ecosystem resilience and animal protection, and help shape recommendations that will inform discussions at UNEA 7. We invite you to use the chat box through the sessions to share your thoughts and the question and answer feature, and these will be addressed in the discussion period. Finally, there will be a closing call to action, encouraging collaboration and contributions towards UNEA 7. Following the webinar, the recording will be shared on YouTube and online repositories along with key resources. Thank you for being part of this gathering of voices, perspectives, and solutions. Together, let us move forward in stewardship, resilience, and kinship with the earth now.
Thank you, Julia, for preparing this land acknowledgement. Are you able to come on screen to give a few brief words of introduction?
So yes, we've got lots in store for you. We've got lots of global partners that have engaged with us, which we are very appreciative of, and we are very humbled to have received accreditation through the United Nations Environmental Program, and it has been a delightful learning journey as we go along, expanding our wings with local grassroots advocacy towards the global stage. Thank you.
Thank you, Julia. My name is Wolf Gordon Clifton. I am representing the organization Animal People, of which I am the executive director. Animal People is a nonprofit organization based in the United States, which has operated since 1992 with the mission of exposing cruelty to animals, advocating on behalf of animals, and raising public awareness of animal sentience and suffering. I have a master's degree in geological science and a graduate certificate in conservation biology, which informs my advocacy on biodiversity issues. And I'm currently doing my PhD in theology and ethics, studying Hindu and Buddhist perspectives and practices relating to animals and ecosystems. So my passion for biodiversity has scientific, social, and spiritual dimensions, some of which you will see later in this meeting and at the Sustainable Human-Animal Interactions webinar I will be hosting in just under a month's time. I don't see anyone else among the organizers present live, but there have been several other groups involved, and of course, Fraser Yaheis, whose concept it was to begin this. So I'm going to be playing a brief introductory video, which Fraser has provided.
Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Fraser, and I serve as Public Advocacy Director and board member of Friends of Saskatoon Afforestation Areas. As a board member, it is truly an honor to open this important webinar series titled Voices from the Afforestation Frontlines, Advancing Sustainable Solutions for a Resilient Planet. This series is hosted by Friends of Saskatoon Afforestation Areas in collaboration with Animal People Inc., United Nations Environment Program, and many other partners. Together, we're creating a space to amplify community voices, highlight innovative solutions, and impact bold dialogue as we move towards the United Nations Environment Assembly, UNEA 7. The theme for this year's UNEA 7 is Advancing Sustainable Solutions for a Resilient Planet, and throughout the series, we'll explore just that. This year, we've designed the webinar series under 3 themes: the link between human and animal well-being, the vital role of biodiversity in resilient ecosystems, and the power of communities leading conservation on the ground. This is more than just a webinar series. It's a call to action, a call to listen, to connect, to act together in shaping healthier, more sustainable, more inclusive future for all life on Earth. Thank you for being here, for lending your voice, and for walking with us on this journey. Let's begin, and thank you once again.
And with that, we can go straight into our main program. We will be presenting summaries of the next 3 webinars and what their topics will entail.
An introduction to community engagement in conservation. Ladies and gentlemen, esteemed colleagues, cherished friends, and members of our ever-growing global community, thank you. Thank you for the privilege of sharing this moment with you today as we gather in anticipation of our upcoming webinar, Community Engagement and Conservation, on Thursday, October 23rd at 6 p.m. New York time. I begin with gratitude. Gratitude for the organizers, for those who make possible the tools and platforms that allow us to connect across continents, and most importantly, gratitude for each of you, for your willingness to pause in your busy lives, to lean in and to consider what role you might play in the great unfolding story of conservation. For conservation, my friends, is not only a scientific pursuit or a policy agenda. Conservation is a profoundly human endeavor. It is about people and place, about heritage and hope. It is about our responsibility to nurture the landscapes that sustain us and to honor the intricate interdependence of all living things. And at the center of this responsibility lies a word that we must lift up today: engagement. Engagement of communities, engagement of voices too often left unheard, engagement that moves us from talk to tangible action. The objectives before us. The upcoming webinar has clear, ambitious objectives. We are setting out to highlight successful grassroots initiatives that remind us that great change often starts small. Examples: examining models of community stewardship that can be replicated, adapted, and scaled across regions. Share tools for empowering citizen action in conservation and animal protection, and, most importantly, to serve as an incubator, thinking global green groups, local community members, and representatives from the United Nations Environmental Program. This is not a simple exchange of ideas. Rather, it is destined to catalyst the planting of seeds that may one day grow into projects capable of transforming not just local landscapes, but the climate and environmental sectors globally. Why community engagement matters. We must pause and act. Why place such an emphasis on community? The answer is both simple and profound. Conservation efforts that ignore communities, efforts that impose top-down solutions without listening, without respect, without shared ownership, are efforts destined to falter. Communities are the stewards of the land. They are the keepers of traditional knowledge, the storytellers of culture, the first responders to crisis, and the long-term caretakers of both human and ecological health. It is communities who live daily with the consequences of environmental degradation. And it is communities who carry within them the wisdom, creativity, and resilience necessary to craft solutions that endure. Engaging communities in conservation is therefore not optional. It is essential. It is how we ensure that measurable impacts are not only achieved, but sustained. And the power of shared knowledge. Consider the range of knowledge that flows into a truly engaged conservation effort. From the elders of Indigenous nations, we learn cultural and spiritual traditions that have maintained ecosystems for generations. From artists, we gain the ability to communicate the urgency of conservation in ways that transcend words through color, sound, and movement. From students and young people, we inherit imagination, unburdened by cynicism, voices fresh and brave enough to speak truth to power. From scientists, we are offered tools of measurement, observation, and evidence. And from community volunteers, we see the simple, yet profound commitment to show up, roll up one's sleeves, and do the work. When these voices come together, we experience what I would call collective stewardship. This is not stewardship imposed, it is stewardship co-created. The value of small beginnings. Too often, when we talk about conservation, we are drawn to monumental visions, the protection of millions of hectares, sweeping climate treaties, massive infrastructure to mitigate environmental decline. These are indeed important, but let us not overlook the small beginnings. A community garden in an urban neighborhood, a classroom project that tracks local bird populations, a small group that comes together to plant trees or remove invasive species. These humble acts matter. They are part of the essence of the bigger picture. They teach us in real time how to collaborate. They cultivate a culture of care. They build the trust necessary for larger initiatives to thrive. And they remind us of something deeply human, that joy and purpose are found in the doing, not only in the outcome. The role of media and storytelling. Now let us remember that media thrives on stories. Good news stories have power. They carry the potential to amplify the work of communities far beyond their immediate surroundings. When a local group restores a wetland, the impact is not only ecological, it is cultural, symbolic, and inspiring. When such a story is shared widely, it ignites imagination in communities elsewhere. If they could do it, why not us? Therefore, in this webinar and beyond, we must commit to storytelling, not as a peripheral activity, but as a core strategy of engagement. Conservation gains strength, not only from policy or science, but from narrative. A framework for engagement, the 4 pillars. Let us also ground ourselves in the 4 pillars of sustainable development. Social, recognizing that conservation must uplift human dignity, health, and equity. Cultural, integrating traditions, languages, and artistic expressions into the work of protecting the earth. Environmental, safeguarding the very systems that sustain life. Economic, creating pathways for livelihoods that are both viable and sustainable. These 4 pillars form a balanced structure. Remove one and the structure wobbles. Together, they create a foundation upon which community-driven conservation can stand. The inner compass of change. Growing together. True and lasting conservation begins not only with the landscapes we protect, but with the people we become. The call to transformation asks us to look inward as much as outward, because sustainable communities are built on sustainable selves. We can think of this journey as unfolding in 5 interconnected pathways: grounding, nurturing self-awareness and resilience; imagining, opening the mind to creativity and fresh possibilities; caring, extending compassion to others, to nature, and to the whole planet; joining, learning to cooperate, listen, and build trust together; doing, moving from intention into meaningful action. These inner pathways guide us as a compass would, reminding us that conservation is not only a task of science and policy, but also of patience, reflection, courage, and growth. When we strengthen both our inner and outer worlds, we become better stewards of each other and the earth. Examples of engagement in action. Let me offer a few glimpses of what engagement can look like in practice. In a small coastal village, fishers agreed to traditional no-take zones, blending scientific data with indigenous practice to allow stocks to recover. In a city park, school children create art installations that highlight endangered species, sparking curiosity among visitors and parents alike. In a rural prairie, farmers collaborate with ecologists to reintroduce native grasses, balancing economic needs with ecological resilience. These are not abstract, they are happening. And they are reminders that engagement is not a theory, it is a lived reality. Networking as capacity building. Community engagement also flourishes when supported by networks. Networks add capacity, share resources, and provide the kind of sustainability support that isolated groups cannot maintain alone. Through networking, grassroots initiatives gain access to invaluable experience. They learn from others' successes and mistakes. They find solidarity in knowing they are part of a larger movement, and they multiply their impact, becoming not solitary actors, but parts of a collective force. Our upcoming webinar aims to strengthen precisely these kinds of networks. The United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. Let us place our work within the larger global framework of the 17 United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs. These goals, ranging from ending poverty to ensuring climate action, from promoting education to fostering partnerships, provide us with a shared vision of what human flourishing on a sustainable planet might look like. Community engagement in conservation is not a separate agenda from the SDGs. It is integral to their achievement. Indeed, without engaged communities, the SDGs risk remaining inspirational. With engaged communities, they become achievable. The role of joy, creativity, and play. Finally, let us not forget that conservation is not merely about struggle. It is also about joy. We must invite joy into our work through art, music, creativity, and playfulness. We must allow conservation to be not only a duty, but a delight. For it is joy that sustains movements over the long term. It is joy that invites others in. And it is joy that reminds us that the earth we strive to protect is not only a responsibility, but a gift. A call to action. As we look ahead to October 23rd, let us prepare our minds and hearts for more than a webinar. Let us prepare for a journey of co-creation. Let us celebrate the love and passion that individuals and groups bring to the greater good. Let us honor the small beginnings and recognize their role in shaping systemic change. Let us lean into collaboration, not competition. And let us remind ourselves that to engage communities in conservation is to engage the very heart of humanity in the work of healing. The journey will not be easy, but it will be meaningful, and it will be ours to share. So, friends, colleagues, partners in this work, thank you for your presence. Thank you for your commitment, and thank you for your belief that together, through engagement, we can turn the tide toward a more just, more sustainable, and more flourishing future. Thank you.
That's lovely, Julia. Thank you.
Thank you.
So, go ahead.
We are very happy to announce that where that introduction was more at a high level, we have people that are going to bring to you on October 23rd the grassroots initiatives that have taken place by a variety of global communities. And of course, we can't have every single global community taking part, but maybe just a few groups bringing in their insights will be inspirational. We can share more through chats and question and answers and things like that. So Thank you for being with us today for the introduction.
Thank you. All right, so now it falls to me to introduce the subject of sustainable human-animal interactions. And so to begin, I would like to start by paying tribute to someone who has had a truly transformative impact on this subject. That would be Dame Dr. Jane Goodall, who most, if not all of you will know, sadly passed away last week after a lifetime of accomplishment. Dr. Jane Goodall came to prominence following the publication of her research in 1960, which showed that wild chimpanzees in Tanzania make and use tools. This was groundbreaking because until that time, it was widely believed that tool use was a faculty unique to human beings. In fact, most scientists up until this point believed that higher intelligence in general was unique to our species, some even going as far as to deny that animals could feel pain, attributing even cries of distress to being simply a mechanical response. So Jane Goodall helped to upend this, and the effects of this were so transformative that her supervisor, the anthropologist Louis Leakey, is said to have remarked, "Now we must redefine tool, redefine man, or accept chimpanzees as humans." One wonders what Louis Leakey would have said if he had survived to witness the discovery that some fishes and insects even use tools. Tuskfish and other members of the wrasse family have been observed using small rocks as anvils to crack open the shells of their prey. And tree crickets are known to modify leaves to create what's called a baffle, amplifying the sound of their mating calls. So does this mean that we have to accept fishes and crickets as human? Well, even I wouldn't go quite that far, but it is important, not only scientifically, but as I will show, ethically and politically as well, that something that was once considered a defining criterion of what it means to be human has turned out to be widespread throughout the animal kingdom. By the way, I do have citations for all of this, and I will be providing that along with beautiful photographs and such in the webinar on this topic. Other faculties that have been discovered in recent decades in non-human animals include abstract thought. Many of you have probably heard it stated as though it was a fact that only humans are capable of reason. We know that this isn't true now. Abstract thought as well is widespread among animals. Field mice have been shown to have a sense of numbers up to 10. African gray parrots can actually do basic arithmetic, adding, and can understand the concept of zero. And even honeybees have been shown to be remarkably intelligent. Honeybees can navigate using landmarks, they can communicate to one another through body language, and they can even learn abstract patterns to help them find food. In the social domain, it's been found that chickens, for example, can recognize one another's faces, are capable of deliberately deceiving one another, and have complex social hierarchies. This is where the term pecking order comes from. Vampire bats are known to show altruism and to form reciprocal relationships with one another, sharing food with members of their social circle, at even at personal cost, and expecting that the favor will be repaid farther down the line. Octopuses which are generally now known to be highly intelligent, can cooperatively hunt with multiple species of fish, communicating with one another through body language. And some animals' communication is found to be so sophisticated with features such as grammatical syntax, personal names, adjectives, and regional dialects. These features have been found in communication in whales and dolphins, and even unexpectedly in prairie dogs, showing that some animals have a capacity for what we would consider language. And finally, of the greatest ethical significance is that it's now widely held that most, if not all, animals are sentient beings, meaning they are conscious. So what does this mean? The definition of consciousness is actually a subject of some heated debate among scientists and philosophers, but one common definition that was given by the philosopher Thomas Nagel is that conscious experience means that there is something it is like to be a given organism. There isn't just the sensation of pleasure or pain, for example, but there is actually enjoyment or suffering, that someone is experiencing these things. Sentience is a closely related subject, specifically referring to conscious experience of suffering or enjoyment. In 2012, there was an important declaration called the Cambridge Declaration on Animal Consciousness, which was signed by hundreds of scientists across various fields of study, stating that, quote, "The weight of evidence indicates that humans are not unique in possessing the neurological substrates that generate consciousness. Non-human animals, including all mammals and birds, and many other creatures, including octopuses, also possess these neurological substrates." So, if animals are sentient, then pain and distress in animals is a subject of ethical concern, especially when it is a result of human-caused actions. We know that physiological pain has been documented across all groups of vertebrates, and there is now significant evidence that cephalopods, many crustaceans, and insects also can feel pain. And psychological distress, fear, sadness, depression, trauma, have been documented in cows, for example, among whom calves have been found to show symptoms of trauma when they are separated from their mothers. And in the wild, chickadees, a species of bird, have been shown to suffer what appears to be PTSD after exposure to predators. These kinds of psychological experiences among animals can have direct impacts on biodiversity. The term ecology of fear has been coined to describe the psychological impact that the presence of predators has on prey species, including, for example, foraging in sheltered areas instead of out in open grasslands. This has then cascading, generally beneficial effects on the total ecosystem. So that's one way in which all of this pertains to biodiversity. Of course, Jane Goodall and other scientists who've provided all of this evidence within recent decades are revolutionary in the context of modern Western science, going back to René Descartes, who's often regarded as the father of Western science, but actually denied that animals were even sentient. The research of the kind that I've presented on turns all of that on its head. But in the larger context of human thought, this can actually be viewed as a recovery of traditional wisdom. Most non-Western and pre-modern cultures across the world have known that animals are sentient, that animals are intelligent. as a scholar of the Dharmic, spiritual, and philosophical traditions, I can attest that in the Hindu and Jain and Buddhist traditions, non-human animals, and even in some systems of thought, plants, are considered to be jivas, meaning they are ensouled beings who participate in the same cycle of life, death, and rebirth as do human beings. And many indigenous cultures also have comparable ideas regarding non-human animals as persons and as nations with whom humans can have reciprocal relationships and owe obligations. So what I'm really getting at here, what all of this shows ethically, is that non-human life has intrinsic value. Non-human animals and the ecosystems of which they are a part don't only matter in terms of their usefulness for human beings, but matter in and of themselves. This is something that is a part of most traditional systems of values, but has been difficult for modern law and policy to really accommodate. So I'm going in addressing the United Nations context. I'm going to talk a little bit briefly about the concept of sustainability. Now, sustainability has become somewhat of a buzzword. You have it often used to describe practices, products, and such without necessarily meaning very much. But as originally conceived, sustainability is actually a fairly radical concept. It's the idea that human beings should live without using any more resources than the earth is capable of naturally replenishing. So then growing out of this comes the concept of sustainable development, meeting human needs without overburdening the earth's natural resources and systems. The Sustainable Development Goals, the 17 SDGs, are extremely important as a kind of compact that human societies have agreed to in the 21st century, that we will band together and we will address problems such as extreme poverty, such as hunger and malnutrition, gender-based violence, lack of education, and so on. And two of the SDGs do directly concern nature, life underwater and life on land. Yet, within this sustainable development framework, as important and as valuable as it is, non-human beings are still generally treated only as resources for human society to use. But this is starting to change in international policy. In 2022, the UN Environmental Assembly adopted a resolution titled the Animal Welfare Environment Sustainable Development Nexus, which acknowledges that the welfare and well-being of animals is directly interlinked with the good of human societies, and that to adequately address the SDGs on behalf of humans, we must also concern ourselves with the needs of non-human animals. Some countries have adopted what's been termed rights of nature, passing laws, seeing court verdicts that protect mountains, landscapes, rivers, forests as persons, meaning that their interests can be represented in court and can be legally enforced. And some countries, especially in Latin America, have, in certain cases, extended these rights to individual non-human animals, ruling, for example, that primates in zoos can't be held captive without meeting their basic needs. In India, there is a law acknowledging the non-human personhood of cetaceans, dolphins, and whales, which makes it illegal to confine them in aquaria. And this is beginning to be acknowledged in UN frameworks as well. as in the Convention on Biological Diversity's current global biodiversity framework. If you look at the framework, it uses language referring to Mother Earth-centric actions, and acknowledges the need for biodiversity policy to be sensitive to, quote, different value systems. The framework reads, nature embodies different concepts for different people, including biodiversity, ecosystems, Mother Earth, and systems of life. The framework recognizes and considers these diverse value systems and concepts, including, for those countries that recognize them, the rights of nature and rights of Mother Earth as being an integral part of its successful implementation. So we are finally starting to see biodiversity policy that acknowledges and is guided by the intrinsic value of other than human beings and entities. So in the webinar, which will be held on November 3rd, I will put details up on the screen in a little while. I'll be discussing more with the guest speakers specific drivers of biodiversity loss and how accounting for the needs and welfare of animals, both in the wild and in captivity, can affect biodiversity policy. But to be very brief, several important recent studies have shown that there are 5 major drivers of biodiversity loss in the world today. In order of their overall impact, of course, this is going to vary between different ecosystems, regions, and so on. But the most important is land and sea use change, followed by direct exploitation of wildlife, pollution, climate change, and invasive alien species. With respect to direct exploitation, wildlife exploitation is a leading cause of biodiversity loss. The wildlife trade has been valued at up to $220 billion annually. 10% of this is illegal wildlife trade, but even legal trades can also pose problems for the protection of species and ecosystems, not to mention the welfare of the animals directly involved. For example, the pet trade is a major driver of biodiversity loss that hasn't been adequately regulated to date. Many animals sold in the pet trade are wild caught, with as few as 3 in 10 surviving from capture to sale, and even fewer surviving after a year in captivity. Legal trades can bolster illegal trade by driving demand, through mislabeling and laundering, and the pet trade is also a major driver for the spread of invasive species when trafficked exotic pets escape and end up gaining a foothold in ecosystems of which they're not naturally a part. Land and sea use change, that would involve the conversion of wild habitat to human purposes, especially agriculture. So in trying to address the impacts of land and sea use change on biodiversity, we have to get into some sometimes difficult territory and grapple with questions. How can we adequately feed the world without overburdening its systems, without causing widespread destruction of wildlife or avoidable suffering to domestic animals? Animal agriculture is an especially large driver, using 26% of all ice-free land for grazing and 33% of all cropland to produce animal feed rather than directly feeding human beings. So we can look at ways, for example, of encouraging reduction of consumption of animal products, especially in nations where this is very high per capita, and by bolstering traditional food systems, by encouraging primarily plant-based food systems. These are some of the policy changes that I would advocate and which we'll explore more in the webinar. Pollution would entail the impacts of plastic pollution, which could quadruple by 2050. So it's extremely important that we look at reducing plastic use, including in the fishing industry, with fishing gear making up at least 22% of marine litter. We need to deal with microplastics, as well as pesticides, agricultural waste, and so on. Climate change. I've talked a little bit about animal agriculture, which is also a major driver of global greenhouse gas emissions. And of course, this has a two-way effect. The ways in which we relate to animals affect the climate, and then climate change itself becomes a major driver of habitat destruction and extinction. So we'll look more at this, and we will look at the issue of invasive species, which I've addressed the impacts that the pet trade can have in introducing non-native species to ecosystems. And of course, this is somewhere where animal welfare considerations can get especially tricky. How do we address situations in which a non-native species is causing a major impact, harming other members of the ecosystem, while minimizing avoidable suffering to the animals we're trying to remove from said ecosystem? This can get tricky, and I'm hoping that we'll have some good discussion and debate in the webinar. So I hope that suffices as a preview. Please join us on November 3rd for further discussion on sustainable human-animal interactions. Dahlia, are you able to unmute and say a few words of introduction? And would you like to introduce the topic of biodiversity?
Yes, for sure. So thank you so much, Wolf, for the opportunity to be here participating in this amazing coordination of webinar series brought to the UNIA 7, in which one we are addressing different relevant topics, not only for the UNIA 7 space, but also for the well-being of our planet and the humanity. So I am Dalia Marquez, co-chair of the Women's Major Group at UNEP, and also co-chairing the Major Group Facilitating Committee at UNEP, CEO or Executive Director of the organization called Youth United in Action, or in Spanish, Juventud Unida en Acción. And I am honored to be here to make a brief presentation on one of the sessions that will be a part of this, and it is the role of biodiversity in ecosystem resilience. So this webinar invites us to reflect deeply on the integrated web of life that sustains our planet. Because biodiversity is not merely a measure of species richness. It is the foundation of ecosystems, stability, adaptability, and long-term health. In the face of accelerating climate change, habitat loss, and ecological fragmentation, understanding and protecting biodiversity becomes a moral and practical imperative. And what we'll explore this webinar? We will delve into how habitat conservation, species protections, and urban afforestation serve as pillars of resilience. These strategies are not isolated efforts. They are interconnected responses that at the same time help ecosystems absorb shocks, regenerate, and continue to provide essential services to all life forms, including, of course, our own. So during this webinar, the participants will hear from voices working on the ground and in policy spaces, sharing insights on how conserving natural habitats safeguard ecological corridors and climate buffers, why protecting keystones and endangered species is vital to maintaining the ecological balance, and how afforestation in urban areas can transform cities into living systems that supports both human and non-human communities. This session is much more than a simple conversation. This is a call to action. As we approach the UNIA 7, we must elevate community-driven solutions that center biodiversity as a pathway to planetary resilience. Whether if you are a scientist, an activist, a policymaker, educator, or just a concerned citizen, your perspective is part of this global dialogue. Therefore, we invite you to join us on November 20 to listen, engage, and contribute to shaping a future where biodiversity is not just protected, but celebrated as the heartbeat of the thriving planet. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dalia. Thank you. I'm really looking forward to your webinar. Julia, would you like me to play what you've prepared on biodiversity, or should we move into the Q&A?
It's getting to be close to 9 o'clock. I think Dalia did a wonderful introduction. We might be able to move into the question and answer. Thank you very much for your comments, Dalia, and thank you very much for your presentation, Wolf, as well.
Thank you. I'm going to briefly display first, the websites of the co-organizers. Please do take a screenshot. These are also posted on the UNEP event page on Eventbrite. And of course, you can contact any of us. But these are our websites. And these are the dates that we will be having the webinars from now on. Community engagement and conservation on October 23rd, sustainable human-animal interactions on November 3rd, and the role of biodiversity in ecosystem resilience on November 20. Please note that the times are different for some of these. We, of course, are aiming at a global audience, so we've staggered the times in hopes that everyone will be able to attend something, even if not all of the dates are ideal for everyone. Again, please take a screenshot if you need it. And then let's move on into Q&A. Julia, would you like to lead us in that?
All right. We have a question here for Dalia about the role of biodiversity in ecosystem resilience. Someone was wondering, what does biodiversity really mean, and why is it so important for keeping ecosystems healthy? The Global Traditional Land Acknowledgement. As we gather virtually from many places across the world, we acknowledge the lands, waters, and skies that sustain us. Being connected to the land and the gifts it provides is a grounding part of our relationships with Mother Earth. In gratitude, we honor the sacred waters, grasslands, forests, biodiversity, and skies that inspire our shared journey. In the spirit of reconciliation, right relations are enhanced by learning from Indigenous worldviews, including Wakatoan, a Cree word from the Nahiawak that reminds us of the kinship and interconnectedness of all people, communities, and natural systems. Guided by this teaching, we come together to walk with respect, reciprocity, and responsibility toward the earth and one another.
Okay, so when we talk about biodiversity and the relevance that biodiversity have in ecosystem resilience, I need to highlight first that ecosystem resilience refers to the ability of the natural systems to absorb disturbances, adapt to change, and recover from shocks, whether those are like climate-related, biological, or human-induced. So biodiversity is the scaffolding of that resilience. It's the diversity of genes, species, and ecosystems that allows nature to respond flexibly to the different stressors. So when one species falters, others can fill its ecological role. When conditions shift, genetic diversity allows populations to adapt. And when landscape fragment, ecosystem diversity offers different alternatives, refuge, and pathways for survivors. So scientific insights tell us that a higher biodiversity are more stable, more productive, and more capable of withstanding extreme events. Forests with a variety of tree species are less vulnerable to pests and disease. By example, a coral reef with diverse marine life recover faster from bleaching. But beyond the science, biodiversity teaches us something deeper, that resilience is relational. It's about interconnection. It's about reciprocity. It's about the way each organism, no matter how small, contributes to the whole. When we lose biodiversity, we don't just lose species. We lose relationships, functions, and futures.
Thank you,
Thank
Dahlia.
you.
That was an amazing answer. Now we'll move on to a question for Wolf. How can I enjoy wildlife in my community without disturbing animals or their habitats?
Well, that's a good question and a very important one. I imagine if you're attending this, you probably feel some connection to natural places, to wildlife. But yes, it is certainly possible to love something to death. This has been documented, for example, excessive tourism to national parks can end up driving away animals, disrupting migration patterns. So it's always important. One basic rule is not to feed wildlife. I've seen this too many times. I've stopped at a rest stop driving, or I'm going camping, and I see huge numbers of ground squirrels or birds flocking right to people who give them food because it's a great photo op and they're adorable. But the problem is the more you feed animals, the more they become dependent on humans, and the more conflict situations are able to arise. This is most serious when it comes to species that pose direct dangers, such as bears, for example, bears that get habituated to being fed or to scavenging food waste, and then start approaching humans directly and becoming aggressive. So this then creates situations in which, in a worst case, a human might end up injured or even killed. And then wildlife services have to come in and kill the bear to end the conflict situation. So it ends up being a lose-lose for everyone. But even when it comes to the small, adorable creatures, feeding them drives overbreeding that can lead to an unsustainable increase of one species at the expense of others. And again, it means that those creatures are happy as long as someone is giving them food for the photo op, but you can't guarantee that the next person coming isn't going to be disgusted by all these rodents everywhere and demand that they be killed. So allowing wild creatures to be wild and not encouraging dependence on humans is one important thing. And then, of course, trying to be as quiet as possible in wildlife habitats, trying to stick to marked trails instead of tromping off, destroying vegetation and burrows and such. Yeah, just try to follow the principle of leave no trace. Leave nothing but footprints, take nothing but memories or photographs.
That is so cool. Well, thank you for your answer to that question. And thank you for the questions that are coming in. We have a question more related to the community engagement aspect. And the question is, how can ordinary people like me get involved in conservation, even if we don't have a science background? And this has come up with the Friends of the Saskatoon Afforestation Areas, as we have been advised by both the City of Saskatoon and the Meewasin to conduct citizen science bioblitzes. And we tell the participants that come to our events that you really don't have to be a scientist or botanist to make a real difference in conservation or take part in our bioblitzes. In fact, community-based observation is coming to be a very powerful tools that we have today, because we have some amazing free smartphone apps like iNaturalist, which documents the photo of the animal, the date, and the place where the animal was seen, which is very invaluable to scientists and students at universities who are making research studies on different animal and plant populations. And we also have Merlin Bird ID, which is a very sophisticated, also a smartphone app that's free. So if you're ever out in the wild and you want to know what is it, whether by bird call through Merlin or whether through photo through iNaturalist, these are amazing devices to help answer that question. And you can contribute that valuable data. And we know that in the Saskatoon, the Ecological Working Group, a division of the Natural Plant Society, has actually said that SARA, the society that in Canada that documents our species at risk, they just can't give a proper species at risk annotation to our fungi in Saskatchewan because we just don't have enough documentation. So there is a big, huge call out for people to use iNaturalist to make these documentations. And each photo becomes a part of the global scientific database and is quite often uploaded to the global biodiversity information platform, GBIF. And besides documenting nature, you can get involved through volunteer tree planting events. Those are quite often put on by Tree Canada here, but also around the world. There's litter cleanups, both on ocean shorelines, as well as we've had huge ones in the afforestation areas, or in ecological restoration days organized by different green groups. So these different hands-on grassroots experience improve the environment and also build community connections. So thank you very much for that question. And now we'll have a little bit more time. And so we'll ask another question of Dahlia that's come through. And Dahlia, how does losing even a few species affect the whole balance of nature? Don't ecosystems just adapt?
Okay, well, I'll give a brief perspective. As I mentioned, I have a background in geological science, specifically paleontology and paleobiology. So the last part of the question, yes, it is true that ecosystems adapt. When one species or many species go extinct, even in a mass extinction event, biodiversity does eventually recover. But when it comes to a mass extinction, it can take millions of years. We're currently living in the largest mass extinction event since the one 65 million years ago that saw the destruction of dinosaurs. So it's a massive loss of species. In that extinction event, biodiversity didn't recover for about 5 to 10 million years after that. And as humans, we rely on the ecosystems in which our species has evolved, the services that they provide. So when you destabilize an ecosystem, yes, nature will survive, nature will recover, but it won't necessarily do so in time for us. So there's an element of self-interest in addition to our concern for the intrinsic value of the creatures that make up an ecosystem. Dahlia, can you also share?
To answer this is a really good question. Thank you for the question. So I just want to highlight that each species plays a unique role, and their absence can unravel the complex web of the different interactions that sustains life. So why every species matter? Because the ecosystem are integrate networks of relationships between predators and prey, pollinators and plants, decomposers and nutrients. And when one species disappears, it's not just a missing puzzle piece. It is a shift in their entire structure. So, by example, if we talk about the loss of ecological functions, species often perform critical roles. By example, pollination, seed dispersal, pest control, or nutrient cycles. By example, birds not only pollinate plants, but also disperse seeds and consume billions of insects annually. And removing them can disrupt agriculture, forest regeneration, and disease control. So there is like a kind of domino effect. The loss of even one species can set off a chain reaction. It's not just about the extinction, it's also about the destabilization, and the ecosystem may drift into an entirely different state. Forests may become barren lands, wetlands may dry into deserts, or coral reef may bleach into rubble. So this is why conservation is not just about saving the animals, because we care about them. This is about preserving the integrity of a full life support systems. And every species, no matter how small or obscure, contributes to the resilience of the whole is important.
That is amazing. Thank you for both of your perspectives, Delia and Wolf, and to get two answers to a question, and both of them are wonderful. They were very profound. So thank you very much. So we've got another question coming in, and it's for Wolf, and it is, what are simple ways I can do to help protect local animals while doing everyday activities like gardening or walking in parks?
Okay, good question. So gardening, one good way to support local wildlife and ecosystems is to plant native vegetation. If you can find what species of wildflowers are native to your location and include those in your flower bed, that will help bees, that'll help hummingbirds, butterflies, whatever other natural pollinators you have in your region. And then that will have positive ripple effects on the rest of the ecosystem. They'll spread the pollen, they'll spread the seeds, as Dahlia was talking about. In the park, well, this is maybe, could argue it's a small thing, but I like to rescue slow-moving creatures, snails and slugs as I come about them. And I say it's a small thing, but of course, to that individual animal, it's a very big thing. That helps to, and you don't know what kind of carry-on effects that's going to have in the ecosystem. And you have citizen science initiatives. Many of them run through iNaturalist. There are bird counting initiatives, which if you're going out to a park anyway, you can download these apps. You can see what kinds of citizen science projects are taking place in your area. And then as you see species, snap a photo if you can, or record the song. And that can help scientists to better understand what species are present in a given area and their numbers. And then, of course, don't feed the wildlife while you're out and about. That would be my immediate answer.
That is awesome, Wolf. Thank you so much.
And I have questions for both you, Julia, and for Dahlia, but those are there any audience questions that should be done first? Okay, I'll go ahead and ask then. All right, I'll start with Dahlia. So your organization works with youth. Given that among younger generations, there's often kind of a sense of defeat. We have the increasing issues of ecological despair and anxiety that are actually increasingly recognized as mental health issues. And I think many of us here can relate to that. For younger people, millennials, Gen Z, Gen Alpha, it can feel like we've inherited a world on fire, but don't really have the power or the means to adequately turn things around. But of course, we have to act. We have no choice. So, Dahlia, could you maybe address how it's possible to inspire hope and determination among younger people? And what is your organization doing to activate the power of youth?
Yeah, thank you so much for that question. You are 100% right. The full situation about climate change, loss of biodiversity, desertification, pollution is creating a lot of anxiety, stress, and concerns among the young generations. Indeed, my organization creates a full program on mental health because we realize that this is something big between young people. So about hope, yes, I know that it will be a little bit hard to see hopes when we receive a lot of different news, scary news about climate change, loss of biodiversity, desertification, eh, social or environmental injustice, etc. But young people have different alternatives. So, by example, my organization has been creating capacity building training sessions on different related topics to give to the young people the necessary skills to participate actively in the different decision making spaces at national, regional, and global level, and to become maybe not the decision makers but the counselors of the decision makers. And I want to share some really good examples. By example, talking about the UNIA 7, there is a group, the Children and Youth Major Group. So this constituency have more than 3,000 members actively participating, following the different decision-making spaces from the beginning. So right now, while we are having this introductory webinar, there is a meeting of a group called the Group of Friends. It's a meeting between civil society, the major groups and stakeholders, and member states who identify themselves friends of civil society. And in this space, young people is having an informal conversation with delegates from member states about the draft resolutions proposed to the UNIA 7. So they are sharing their opinions, their positions in an informal dialogue. This is a unique space to have real incidents and advocate for what we really matters. And it's a perfect space to talk directly with those who took the decisions. So as we have this space, there are other spaces in the different decision-making places at global level, but also is key to participate at national level. And beyond that, if you feel that there is no any hope, just remember that with your daily actions, you can plant the seed to create change. But you need to start with your daily actions. And after that, you will see growing up that seed in an amazing network of people working for the same. And the best example is this series of webinars. So to me, capacity building is key to empower young people and also support in terms of capacity, but also funding resources, support young people to be aware and to be able to participate in those spaces in which one the policymakers are creating uh, the different policies, new rules or law that will be defining what is the next in terms of public policies or activities or actions at local, national, but also global level.
Thank you, Dahlia. That was a beautiful answer. I feel encouraged. So I have a question, Julia, for you as well. Your organization, of course, focuses on afforestation, and rebuilding damaged or lost ecosystems is a huge part of biodiversity protection. But it's also possible to go about it the wrong way. For example, we have tree planting schemes that are just basically monocultures that don't support biodiversity. So I was wondering if you would talk a little bit about what are the important considerations that go into a successful ecological reconstruction, and why is it that just planting rows of eucalyptus is not sufficient to really rebuild a forest ecosystem, for example?
That's a great question, Wolf. The way our afforestation area started in Saskatoon was that the land was bought in 1960 and planted to trees in 1972 and 1973. And at that time, it wasn't during this era of working about climate change. They were more addressing pollution in that era. And they were actually making these afforestation areas as tree nurseries. And so they got advice from the Prairie Farm Rehabilitation Administration, which was a group that was planting tree saplings and making them available to farmers to make windbreaks around their fields because they learned that from the dirty 30s when we had huge amounts of dirt blowing around the prairies because of drought. So the trees were planted. They have 12 different drought-resistant hardy species that were planted. And they planted them to become naturalized forest. Now, 50 years later, they have become that. The trees were not planted in rows, and for a minimal amount of time, those forests were used as tree nurseries. Now we realize that if we're going to do ecological restoration of the world's most endangered ecosystem, our temperate grasslands that are in our North American prairies, or if we were going to plant a man-made forest, or support wetlands, what we have learned is that you really do have to do a good site plan and an ecological assessment first to find out what's there. You cannot protect what you don't know. And that is where professional ecological assessments through landscape architects or engineers and botanists is very important, but it's supported by citizen science in a big way because botanists can't be out there 24/7, 365 days a year. So with a combination, you get an idea of what's on the land that you want to restore, and you don't do more damage. Like if you were going to take, say, the wetlands that are imaged behind me and go, oh, we have a good idea. We're going to try to mitigate the amount of dogs or people that are in those wetlands, and we're going to plant some riparian shrubbery and bushes around there, like willows and dogwoods and things like that. Well, you have to do a study because we've got over 62 species of risk at those afforestation areas, and the majority of them are around the wetlands. And what has been found is that certain species at risk that use those wetlands, they do need a clear space along the wetlands. If you planted it all to shrubbery or willows, it would affect their habitat and you would probably lose. You would probably do an extirpation of those species at risk at that wetlands. So going in with knowledge and some observation, you also have to figure out what you predict for climate over the next years. If you're planting a forest, you have to make allowances for the next, I don't know, 3 or 4 years after the trees are planted. You can't just plant tree saplings and forget them. You have to, if you want success, especially if you're going to have students or classrooms joining you, you have to figure out a way to make their efforts successful so that they can go a few years later and go, ta-da, that's what we did, instead of having the trees die on them. And so that's a very important consideration as well. And getting as many people involved as you can, making, of course, the first step is getting the landowner involved, and then getting as many community green groups involved, because sometimes doing an ecological restoration project means removing invasive species. Like in North America, we have a very bad noxious invasive species of smooth brome, and that is only for green spaces. If you were talk to a rancher, smooth brome is an amazing plant. They plant it and forget it. They've got fodder for their horses and cows forever and ever. They don't have to really fertilize or take care of it. But when smooth brome gets into our ditches, our highway ditches, or into our green spaces, you've lost your native species altogether. So those are just a few things you have to think about. So thank you for your question. It's an amazing endeavor, and it needs a little bit of thought.
Thank you, everyone, for your attendance today. I hope that you've found it enjoyable, that you found it educational. I'm going to share again the dates of the webinars that are still coming up. Again, community engagement and conservation, which Julia and Fraser, who wasn't here today, but I understand will be present for that one, will be holding on October 23rd. I will then be hosting Sustainable Human-Animal Interactions on November 3rd. And finally, Dahlia will be hosting the role of biodiversity and ecosystem resilience on November 20. So on behalf of all of the organizers, thank you for attending this first part of what we hope will continue to be an edifying and helpful webinar series leading up to the next UN Environment Assembly. Thank you, everyone.
And thank you.
Yes, I just want to congratulate the full team for the well coordination of this session and the future webinar sessions. So thank you so much. And for the participants at Observer, please participate and get involved in this amazing conversation. Thank you so much.
All right. Have a wonderful day, everyone. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.